Hey guys, follow along with me as I take you up the entire ascent of the most dangerous trail in Acadia National Park. So this trail ascent today is actually the second time I had hiked this trail. The first time was actually the day before I filmed this. And up to that point, the only trails in Acadia that I had hiked were the Beehive and the South Bubble Trail, both of which are just phenomenal trails in terms of views. I would actually argue that you could put the Beehive or the South Bubble and possibly even other hikes up against the Precipice in terms of their view. I think the Beehive would actually be a decent test on whether or not you are ready to do the Precipice. There is a little bit of ladder work on that trail, and if you hiked the Beehive and had a great time on it, then I would think the Precipice might be a potential for you to then graduate to. You may have noticed that I just passed by a warning sign. Basically, the sign says, this trail follows a nearly vertical route with exposed cliffs that requires climbing on iron rungs. Falls on this mountain have resulted in serious injury and death. Small children and people with a fear of heights should not use this trail. And it also mentions that dogs are prohibited on the trail. One of the things that makes this trail actually fairly unique, separate from the ladder work towards the middle and top, is that the trail is actually closed from around March to mid-August because of the peregrine falcons breed on those cliffs and they are protected, and you are not allowed to hike during their breeding season on the Precipice front face. That presents a good opportunity actually to, if you come to the park and the trail is closed, there are opportunities for actually viewing the falcons. They have ranger-led groups, I believe, that will take you, you can view with a telescope or binoculars the falcons on the side of the cliff. The peregrine falcon is actually charted as the fastest bird in the world. It's been clocked at over 200 miles per hour during its high-speed dives. And a National Geographic program said that the highest measured speed of the falcon was 242 miles per hour. We are approaching here the first rung obstacle on the trail, and it's sort of a precursor to what you're going to be experiencing higher up, and it presents an obstacle for people that if you really are struggling on this boulder and rung combination, that maybe the rest of the trail, maybe you might want to try an easier hike before heading up the trail. You do get to a point at some level on the precipice where turning around would be very difficult, and probably wouldn't be a great idea to get up there and not be able to traverse the ladders or the rungs. I would also add that if you have a hand injury or some type of ankle injury, I myself would not recommend attempting this. I did find that I needed both hands and, strong ankles and legs to be able to get up through those ladders. At the beginning of the trail, there are areas where you go through short inclines and then short declines before you get to the regions where you start ascending very quickly. We are approaching an area of a rock slide, ascending pretty much, hand over fist. You ascend for several hundred yards before the trail veers off to the right, and you make a couple of traverses underneath a boulder system. You do have the option of going over the boulders. I, however, thought it was more fun to actually go under the boulders. Early on in this hike, they do have some rung features on the rocks. Most of them are really well placed, and I thought it was a good idea to start using those early before I got to some areas where it was either more steep or maybe in a little bit more precarious of a position. Later on in the hike, you're really glad to have some of those features to hold on to. As I am hiking this today, I actually kind of feeling the effects from having climbed this the day before. And so I think that in combination with the fact that this was my first hike of the summer made me ascend a little bit slower than I normally would. This is that rock slide section that I had mentioned, and there was a group ahead of me that they actually kept going up the rock slide instead of turning right onto the trail. There may be another trail that goes that way, but I, let them know that the blue trail anyway veered off to the right, and I think most people would, when they're climbing the precipice, do want to challenge themselves on the ladders and the rungs. It's definitely foggier today than it was yesterday. It does look like the sun is trying to burn off the fog. But over here to my right is a huge rock slide. And a big group of people actually just headed right up the rock slide, and the trail actually continues this way. And it goes under this rock here. This hike traverses the side of Champlain Mountain. The trail actually, you could traverse over the rocks here as well. I chose to go under the rocks. I thought it was kind of an interesting way to get through this section. There's another trail in Maine called Tumbledown Mountain, and they have a section where you climb up through the rocks, and there's a ladder section there, and that is called Fat Man's Revenge. It was the first hike I had tried where you climb through a hole in the rock, and in order to get to the top, the trail goes right through that hole. If you wanted to get to the top a different route, you would have to take a trail on a different section of the mountain. I'd be curious for anybody watching this if they want to leave a comment and let me know what their favorite hike in Acadia is, and maybe why. This trail, we're approaching an area where we're going to start using metal railings, and we do get to a point following that where we start using ladders. But I did find this a very enjoyable hike. It's not an easy hike. In many of the hiking books, they consider this a strenuous to expert hike. This, in my opinion, was not the hardest hike I've done. I did consider Mount Katahdin, traversing the Knife's Edge, to be a more difficult hike than this. That is about a 12-mile hike round trip, and the Knife's Edge is a solid mile of climbing over boulders. Here we're approaching a really well-constructed bridge that seems to cross over what would be a waterfall if it was raining. Some really nice features on this hike. Well-constructed bridges, and the rungs are just really solid on the latter sections coming up later in the hike. As I'm hiking along here, I hope that the video shows some of the colors of the granite that exist here in Acadia National Park. There's a pink granite that you find, I believe, only here, and it's just very beautiful. If you ever do come to Acadia and have the desire, I really highly recommend taking one of the ranger-led geology tours, and also the star-gazing evening at Sand Beach. I've done both of those over the prior years and just learned a great deal. Because of the fog that was out this day, I did find the rocks were slightly more slippery than I think they normally would be. So I am taking my time, especially on the downhill segments early on here, to avoid slipping. The fog is also creating sort of a low contrast effect in the video, and so even though I did record this in 4K, I think that the low contrast in some ways makes for a more interesting look. When I hiked it the day before, it was very sunny, and I could see the entire distance over each of these overhangs or cliffs. And in my experience, or in my mind, I did find it a little bit more unnerving having the fog there than when I hiked it and it was perfectly sunny. I wonder if any of you watching would mind posting in the comments which are your favorite hikes in national parks around the country. Two of the hikes that I really look forward to doing at some point are the Half Dome hike in Yosemite and Angel's Landing hike in Zion National Park. One of the other things that I really enjoyed about this hike was, compared to some of the other hikes in Acadia where you can get pretty large crowds of people, this hike, even though I passed a couple heading up the mountain, and then I did let a younger couple pass, there were a lot fewer hikers on this trail, and in a way, for me, that was a more enjoyable experience. I feel like I was able to connect with the landscape or the hike in a way that if I had 20 people in front of me and behind me, that I might not have been able to do. I am approaching, which was for me one of the scariest parts of the hike. Kind of walk along this increasingly narrow pathway, and there are no real barriers or hand railings here, and there are a couple areas where the trees are actually almost in the middle of the trail, and coming up there's a fairly large exposure to the cliff here on the left. But you can see how as I'm moving along there are some trees and branches on the way, and I'm wearing a backpack, and to a degree that inhibits my ability to move close to the rock. There's an area here, right here, where you have to change levels. You have to go up. I'm not a very skilled rock climber, and the path actually disappears right here, and you have to come around this corner in order to get up there, and so you really have to get a solid hold to be able to get up that. There may have been a different, easier route that I could have taken, but I didn't. So I was fairly glad to make it through that segment. I have to say, I hiked this yesterday in the sun. Today with the fog, it's a little bit creepier. One of the things I noticed about this trail, there are a lot of stairs on the trail that both ascending and descending the climb, and I found some of the stair sections actually not that easy to traverse. You might be able to see it, but both the size of the steps and the size of the rise are inconsistent from stair to stair. And there were times when having the stairs there might have been even more difficult than just climbing on bare rock. Another thing I wanted to mention, and I think you can see it here, some of the platforms that you walk along as the trail progresses are actually slanted slightly away from the mountain, and so they're not exactly flat. So when you're walking along those, just take your time. Section coming up right here where I might have wished for maybe 1 or 2 extra rungs. You can see me kind of sliding here against the rock. It's a fairly substantial drop off right here. You do get rungs in this little narrow section. I myself maybe wish that they were a couple of extra on either side. going to leave you here with the sounds of the hike, climbing up the rungs, and we are almost at the top of the mountain.